Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be heading back to school and summer camp for a vast selection of interesting stories. I also have the pleasure of being joined by someone who I've wanted to work with for a long time. You may be familiar with his work, the incredible Mr. Sinister. A link to his channel will be featured in the description and at the end of the video for your consideration. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to work at a summer camp. Usually the kids would go to bed by 9 PM at the least, so the rest of us would just hang out around the fire. One night one of the kids came to the fire pit, which was about 100 yards from the cabin, saying that she was having trouble sleeping because of the noise. So I walk back with her and make sure everything is good in the cabin, and come back to tell everyone to keep it down. Maybe 10 minutes later she comes back and says that she still can't fall asleep. I walk back with her again, and in my head I'm thinking that she's just being restless because we aren't being loud. But anyway, I make sure she's under the covers and head back to the fire pit. Just as I'm about to get there, I realize that I left my walkie-talkie in her room. So I head back there and see that she's sitting upright in bed with the walkie-talkie in her hand. I'm thinking, okay, whatever, and tell her to go to sleep. I head back to the fire pit, and the guys are like, "Why did you say that to her?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "We heard you on the walkie-talkie tell her that she would look better if she shaved her head. That all the girls look better with shaved heads." I never said that, but no one believed me. And it was obvious not her saying it either, since it was a grown man's voice. I rushed back to check on the cabin, and everything was normal. I worked at a Boy Scout camp for 2 years in high school as a summer gig. A requirement for the Scouts is to earn their Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, and for this, they had to set up shelters along with other activities. Before I was staff, the Scouts would go 12 miles into the woods for their night out to a place called Shelby's Dream. The stories of kids waking up screaming, talking about seeing a ghost running at them and being hung from trees and other wild experiences were many. Everyone wrote those kids off and called them crazy. Eventually there were things people couldn't explain, such as staff members waking up with scratches and cuts on their body. The backstory of the place is that there was a mass killing of Southern soldiers during the American Civil War, and Shelby was the daughter of the Southern captain, who was hung with all his men. She supposedly came back to the camp to find her father and all his men hung from the trees. We stopped sending the group to that location a few years back. One night my cabin mates and I went out there to see if the rumors were true about that place. I heard voices, cries, and screams that echoed into the forest. There's a point where you cross a bridge, and once over the bridge the wilderness stops. The woods continue, but there's no noise for animals or insects. Absolute silence, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. When I was around 11, we went camping. It was the first time I did it. According to the schedule, we were supposed to listen to a person tell scary stories, but for whatever reason they never showed. So as our final evening activity, we went on a night hike instead. The walk was pretty normal and actually quite fun, until we stumbled upon these cute little fairy homes built into a tree. We all looked at the tiny houses and noticed you could open one of the doors, so we looked inside and found what was rather spooky. It was a note saying back in 5. Now this may not seem that scary, but just you wait. We carried on and kept walking. Later on we stumbled upon a lake, and we looked across it, shining our light so that we could see, and saw something rather strange. Parked on the opposite side were a few vans and cars facing us. We were instantly spooked, and to make things worse, we started to see people walk around. You could tell something wasn't right, because even the teachers seemed to be scared and nervous. The doors of the van were open, and I believe something was inside, but I can't remember. Nevertheless, it scared us more and more, and soon after we left and headed back to the fairy/gnome houses. On our way back, curiosity got the better of us and we decided to check if the note was still there. It was not, and that sent shivers down our spine. We left straight away, and for the rest of the night we wondered who took the note. I doubt it was one of my fellow classmates because we were all looking at it, and I doubt anyone would have taken it.
The whole situation took place at the beginning of July, but only today I decided to share it. Me and my classmates went to a camp at the end of the school year. There were about 20 of us, a maximum of 22. We were there for 4 days. All the time we had some classes which we went to in smaller groups to limit contact with each other. On the last evening, we had a task to find all the points marked on the map by the organisers in the field. We were divided into groups of 3. Each of us had a map. It all started at 8 p.m, and everyone had to come back up to 10 p.m. There were 5 points. The farthest was 4 kilometers from the campsite. I was in a group with 2 girls. One of them at school is shy and speaks very little. But then, at the camp, she was talking and joking all the time. The second of them is the life of the party. He talks to someone all the time, laughs, and it was no different then. A few words about me. I have a few friends that I talk to, but I'm afraid to talk to people. I'm definitely an introvert. So, returning to the topic, we went to the nearest point with the map in hand. It did not take long to find it, but when we were close to this point, things started to happen that I fear to this day. The point was on the edge of the forest. On the road where we were walking was a car, a grey off-the-road car without license plates. There were 4 men in the car who were watching us closely. Their faces themselves seemed weird, but I found them to look like that because you don't often see teenagers with a map near the woods. The car passed, and we went to the next point, which was already in the forest. After about 10 minutes, we heard the sound of an engine again, and it was the same car, the same people, only this time they passed us, almost stopped, and looked at us straight in the eyes. Except the driver, of course. They drove away, and I, like the girls, was scared. We were walking towards this point, along a road in the woods, and we saw a flashlight from the opposite direction. It turned out to be just the second group. When we were close to each other, I saw that they were somehow scared. And the question that a friend from the second group asked me made me feel cold, and for a moment, I had the impression that the world was moving away from me. He asked me if any men from the grey car were watching us too. I told him yes, and was afraid because I had some suspicions about who they were and where they could be. And together, we decided we were going to go back to the camp. After about 15 minutes, we heard the engine sound again, and immediately told everyone to jump into the bushes on both sides of the road. The same people from this car were driving very slowly, shining their torches from the windows of the car into the forest and talking to each other very loudly in some language. I guess it was Arabic or some language similar to Arabic. Then my passes proved to be successful. Namely, just before leaving the camp, I heard the organisers talking to each other if it was a good idea, because there is a centre for aggressive immigrants nearby, and one of them is worried about our safety. The men drove on, and we started walking very quickly towards the camp. When we got really close, we heard some screams in Arabic, and then me and my friend shouted to the rest, "Let's go to the camp, quickly!" After a while, we were on the premises and told the educator everything that happened. About 2 minutes later, a dozen or so people from the organisers' building ran out and got into their cars and drove towards the forest. I remember that for a long time after returning, I was afraid, and at night I could not fall asleep. Until today, it was the most terrible thing I have ever experienced.
I used to work at a summer camp. The scariest thing that's ever happened was during one of my stories with 15 campers around the fire. The other staff members working with me interrupted me mid-story, which I thought was for dramatic effect, to tell me to be quiet and listen. We heard some howls far away from coyotes, but we didn't worry about coyotes since they're usually so small and timid. As I began to tell the story again, no more than 15 seconds later, another 3 howls came from the state woods around us, just closer this time. This continued until it felt like the howls were only 100 yards away, when they abruptly stopped. At this point, the kids had kind of panicked, and I was getting a little uneasy due to the proximity of them. But once again, I don't usually worry about coyotes since they're so timid. As we sit in silence, we waited to see what would happen. Not 2 minutes later, the calls started again, louder and closer. The first call came from around 100 feet into the woods in front of us. The second call came to our left, same distance, and the last 2 came from right behind us, around 50 feet or so from the fire, to the point that we could see the coyotes at the tree line. At this point, the kids are crying, and myself and a coworker stand up to try and scare them away. The coyotes at the back entrance of the woods actually stand their ground and growl at us. So we grab the nearest logs we can find and howl back, chasing them away, and ended up chasing them through the woods and found their den the next day about 3 miles up a hill, filled with bird feathers and bones. Cool stuff happened working at that camp. I miss it. Nothing really creepy happened except for maybe a mountain lion call here and there, and some faint rhythmic drums in the woods that we heard, but we guessed it could have just been some kids, right? I used to teach outdoor education, which was essentially just summer camp during the school year, and school groups would come up and spend a few days at the camp. On their last night, we would always tell them scary stories around the campfire. It was the same scary story every time. We worked in partners, so there would always be 2 staff members for every school group and make scary noises. So I'm telling the story, and every few minutes there's a snap of a twig or a rustle in the bushes. And of course, as always, the kids get all freaked out and they start getting scared. It's very fun. Well, as I'm telling a story, I'm walking around the campfire, looking at all the kids' faces, and I notice a familiar one, my partner Eric, sitting there smiling at me, wondering why I'm staring at him. My heart has never beat so fast in my life. Eventually, I sped through the story and all the kids left, and I explained to Eric that I thought it was him in the woods, and his eyes got very wide and he said, "Are you telling me that it wasn't one of the staff members?" So we both ran back to the main road. Sophomore year of high school, a friend and I thought it would be fun to skip English class and go to the neighboring town's school. Very rebellious and dumb. When we got there, we were unaware that the school was in lockdown for a random drug test. We walked inside thinking, I bet we'll just blend in and nothing happens. Turns out the principal was standing in the middle of the hallway. When he goes, "Hey, what are you doing in the halls?" My partner in crime ran into a bathroom and I ran to the car. I was sitting there and suddenly I see my partner running to the car with the principal running after him. He jumped in the car and we sped off, and I noticed that a lot of students in the windows were staring at us like we were the reason for the lockdown, and maybe we brought weapons or drugs to the school or something. The principal was holding on to the back of the car. We got away. However, he caught the license plate from my friend's car, and a few days later we figured out that we got caught on the high school's security cameras. The principal wanted to sue us for trespassing on school property. However, he was too busy coaching the volleyball team to pay attention to the case. My parents were pissed, and I felt very bad about the whole thing, mostly because this was my first time skipping class, and it went absolutely terribly.
From the time I was around 10 years old till I was around 14, my parents enrolled my brother and I in a summer camp for a month for our holidays before we went to our home country for the rest. We had a set schedule we had to follow from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. We were then free to do whatever we wanted on the grounds of the summer camp until it was time to go home. At 9 a.m. we had swimming for an hour. Then at 10:30 a.m. we could go ice skating for a couple of hours. You could opt out of either or both, but these were the timings and we could only do these activities during these times. Now, I love to swim, so I never ever skipped swimming in the morning. My brother, who was almost 3 years older than me, did skip occasionally. The reason I bring this up is because the swimming pool is where our story begins. There is a lifeguard who worked at the pool. He seemed to be the highest ranking lifeguard because he was the one giving orders most of the time. On one fateful day when my brother decided to forego swimming, he called to me as I passed by him. Let's call him Joe. He asked me what my name was, how old I was, where I was from. I grew up in a culture that was really diligent about respecting your elders, so little 12-year-old me answered all his questions, never thinking he could possibly have nefarious intentions. Until he asked if I had a mobile phone. I didn't, so I said so. And this whole-ass, grown-ass man said, "Well, can I have your landline number then?" I remember feeling distinctly uncomfortable all of a sudden. I was suddenly acutely aware of his gaze on my swimsuit-clad body. Thankfully, my parents had drilled into me to never give out our numbers to strangers, so I mumbled a quick, "No, sorry," and ran off to play with my friends. After this initial contact, Joe only grew bolder. Whereas at first he never dared approach me when my brother was around, Joe started to speak to me when his back was turned. I tried so hard to avoid him, but he aggressively pursued me and tried to cultivate a friendship with me. As if a 10-year-old and a 30-something-year-old has something to be friends over. However, I pretended not to see him when he would wave me over and never went by the lifeguard station he was at if I could help it. So, he started walking over to whichever edge of the pool I happened to be resting at and starting a conversation. Or he would call me by my name so I would be forced to stop and speak to him for fear of being rude. I still remember his reaction when I first wore a bikini to the pool. Unabashed hunger. It was disgusting, and I never wore a two-piece to the pool again. And the bastard never stopped asking for my landline number. It was every single time he managed to get me to speak to him. A relentless litany of, "Come on, aren't we friends now? I just want to chat to you sometimes. Let me call you and talk to you. I just want to be friends. Friends can talk to each other, can't they? We are just friends. Your parents won't mind." If I remember correctly, I managed to avoid giving it to him that summer. But the next summer, my brother was too old to attend the camp. It was for children between 7 to 13. I attended at 14 because they made an exception for me. They would have done the same for my bro, but he didn't want to attend anymore anyway. And so, I was enrolled by myself. And that's when Joe really ramped up his harassment in his quest to get my number. It wasn't just at the pool anymore. He would stand outside by the skating rink and call me as I went by. He would find me in the arcade. He would approach me as I bought tickets for the outdoor rides. And if I so much as acknowledged him, I was stuck in a conversation with him for at least 15 minutes. It was exhausting, and he would not let up. He eventually wore me down enough that I gave in and told him the number to my landline. I didn't think he would have the balls to call, but he did. Every single day. Sometimes twice a day. The first time I answered, he acted quite normally. "Hi, is this Cute and Execute? How are you? What are you doing?" I awkwardly answered, but my mum came into the room and I panicked and hung up. She asked who that was. I lied and said it was a wrong number because I felt like I had done something wrong. Like it was my fault this adult was pursuing me. Every phone call I got from then on got weirder and weirder. He would croon my name and beg me to speak to him. He'd ask me what I was doing, if my parents were home, why I didn't stop and speak to him at camp today. He missed me, etc. I learned to recognize the number, so I would just lift up the handset and put it back down. He would call back, and I would hang up. I started jumping at the sound of the phone. I'd run to get it so my parents wouldn't get to it first and find out I'd given a stranger our number. But eventually, he fucked up and got caught. He called one day when I was at camp. I don't know why he wasn't at work that day, but the supervisor came to me and told me not to get on the bus at the end of the day and that my father was coming to pick me up. I was super happy to hear that and sat by the office to wait. My dad arrived, ignored me completely, and stormed into the office. You could hear him yelling all the way outside. Joe was eventually called to come to the camp and my dad yelled at him some more. It took ages, but eventually my dad came out, kissed me on the top of my head, and took me home. I was never told exactly what happened, but from what I understood, one of my parents, probably my mum, answered the phone, and before they could say anything, he started his usual one-sided conversation. They listened for a while, put together that it was someone who worked at the camp and his nationality. We are Arab, and he was speaking Arabic with a distinct accent. Coincidentally, he was the only person in the camp's employment from that country, so they tracked him down easily. He wasn't fired. In fact, he still worked there when I stopped going to the camp a few years later. But he never spoke to me ever again. And thank God for that. So Joe, I hope we never meet again.
I'm a 32-year-old male, and I was in first grade when this took place. It's a famous story in my family. Growing up, I hated school for many reasons, and one of those reasons was that I was always the target for bullying. Admittedly, I was a weird kid. I would talk to myself, blurt out random lines from movies completely out of context, and the slightest insult would send me into a rage. My bullies got a real kick out of this and would make fun of me every time to get a rise. The teasing would only end once I started pummeling them. And this story is about my very first bully called Ajax. It began one day on the bus heading home. I was talking to a girl I liked at the time called Diana, when suddenly the skinny blonde kid who was about half a head taller than me leans over his seat behind me and says, "Dylan's the Millins a baby." Now, any of you know what a Millins is? Yeah, me either, but the na-na tune was enough for me to turn my head and make it red. And being called a baby didn't help either. And before I knew it, I started fighting back against my bullies. So I just screamed at him over and over for him to shut up, which of course he didn't. Then Diana started yelling at him to shut up too, which only made him laugh. Now I should also note that Ajax lived just across the street from me. So this merciless taunting continued even after the bus pulled up at my stop. The memories of this part of my life are so vague. I'll jump to a few days later. I was playing outside when Ajax and his friends cornered me and took turns pushing me and calling me names. I yelled at them to stop, because it worked the first time, but they carried on harassing me. I lost it, grabbed an air pump and began swinging it at them, and I actually managed to chase them a few blocks before I turned around and went home. But now for the meat of the story. 2 days later I was playing outside again, when Ajax starts making fun of me from across the street. I don't remember what he said, but I walked over to give him a piece of my mind, and as soon as I got close to him, he grabbed the toy I had been playing without my hand, hard, which in hindsight wasn't a smart thing to bring, and threw it up onto the roof of his mum's garage. Furious, I went to grab him, but he turned and ran. I chased him around to the backyard, and when I turned the corner, I stopped in my tracks. I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw. There, tied to a tree and crying, was Diana. No joke. Ajax stood next to her laughing. To this day, I don't know what he did to her. My shock was swiftly replaced with the fury of a demon, and I grabbed the sharpest stick I could find and lunged at the laughing idiot. He caught my wrist, and we grappled for a while, me snarling, him laughing. As we fought, he knelt down and reached for a yellow water pistol lying on the ground. I stomped on his hand and somehow managed to drop the stick, and gave Ajax a shove. Turned and ran to the front porch where I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I could find, a metal canteen, and then hid myself and waited. After a long, silent minute, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. When I saw it was Ajax, I swung the canteen as hard as I could down on his head, and without waiting to see what would happen next, I ran back to the backyard, untied Diana, and walked her home. I won't lie, at the time I was feeling like a superhero. Until years later that I learned from Ajax's mum that I had actually knocked him out cold and completely ruined the canteen. We only fought one time after that. It was about a year or two later when he started giving me crap again. I grabbed a fake sword that I had made by removing the plastic blade and replacing it with strips of metal from my dad's shed, and went across the street to teach him a lesson. He grabbed a chain and we circled each other in his driveway, swinging at each other and exchanging insults. Thankfully, one of the adults, I forget who, saw the fight and broke it up before one of us got seriously injured. After that, we actually slowly became friends, though it was still a bit weird when we hung out. Once he tried unsuccessfully to get me to eat dog crap, and another time after that he moonied me when we went swimming in his pool. But aside from that, we got along okay. We played video games and even made a movie together in which I played a goblin, his sister a princess, and he the prince. Sadly though, the very last thing I heard from Ajax was that he threw a dart at his mum's head and ended up in a mental institution. His mum survived, but I have no idea where he is to this day. Not the scariest story. After all, I was only 6, and seeing my childhood crush bound and crying on my bully's property was an experience that will stay with me until my dying day. I was a tutor for an elementary school, where I would pull out advanced reads and conduct a book club sort of thing to encourage kiddos that were ahead of their classmates to still find interests in reading. This was around the time when school shootings were getting really rampant in the US a couple of years back. So I'm there alone with 5 third graders joking around and having book club in the empty classroom I was allowed to use, when all of a sudden an alarm goes off and an announcement is made that there is an active shooter on campus and that we must lock our doors and conduct active shooter protocols. I lose my mind. I usher the students into a little coat closet out of the view of the door, lock the door and flick off the lights. To make it worse, me being a stupid college student at the time, I never had my phone charged. I send as many texts to loved ones as I can, trying to not alarm them, but letting them know I love them, and something is happening at work before my phone dies. The students are also afraid, and about 30 minutes pass, and I hear footsteps outside of the door, and quite literally stop breathing, but they go past. I don't hear any shot or anything. Another half hour passes and I realize I should call the front office to see if they have any updates. My brain goes stupid during emergencies apparently, and I forgot that classrooms have built-in phones during my panic. They answer like nothing's wrong, and I say something like, "Hi, I'm a tutor here, and I've 5 students with me in room Y. Is it safe to come out? Are the police here?" The woman doesn't answer for a little, and as dead ass says, "Oh, we didn't make an all clear announcement? The drill is over." I was so close to tears I just hung up. Then an announcement was made that the drill is over. Nobody thought it would be important to let an outside school contractor know about a drill that very well could have been real. I swear I could have wet myself. I was attending this boarding school that was over 175 years old. I was entering 6th grade and moving into the dormitories above the school infirmary. On the first night, when settling in, I was by my desk and looked out the window to see this really young boy, pale and glowing. What was strange was that he had a cape tied to his neck, slick hair with a short sleeve button-up shirt, shorts and bowling shoes. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me since he wasn't too far from the streetlight. As I'm looking at him, he looks up at me, waves and walks away while vanishing into the night. I told my roommates and they laugh at me. Fast forward in time. I'm now in the 9th grade, and was going to this alumni event where we talk to alumni and look at memorabilia. I'm going through old Lettermans, baseball leagues, and other things on display when I come across an old picture of the same young boy with a friend. I could recognize him immediately because he looked exactly like the same ghost that I saw a few years back. The picture was taken during Halloween, which explains the cape. I was so shaken up about it, I had to leave the event for a moment. According to one alumni, the little boy died in a flu outbreak in the infirmary that killed a lot of students in the early 1900s. His friend, also in the photo, survived, graduated, and donated the photo along with other tokens to the collection. I've heard many ghost stories about spirits who pass through and haunt the old dorms. Also, many of the buildings are basically relics, so I'm surprised that I didn't see more ghosts on campus.
Hey everybody, sorry for the English, I tried my best. I thought a long time before posting my story here, or rather two that happened to me, and one of my colleagues. It's not something scary, but rather something very uncomfortable, and my friends told me it would fit in here. Let's get started. Both stories happened in the summer of 2018 when I was working as a facilitator in a recreation centre for children. Small sections up to first grade. We were in a kind of park about 20 minutes away by bus, and we stayed all day before going back to school at about 5 p.m. so that the parents could pick up their children. This park was reserved for us, and therefore nobody else other than us, our managers and those who take care of the canteen, are supposed to be there, especially since around it there are only fields, a forest and a building site, but it was quite far. Now that the context has been set, I begin the first story that happened to my colleague. We had walkie-talkies for the day, which allowed us to reach our managers, the secretary or the infirmary in case of a problem, but they were returned when it was time to leave to be recharged during the night. So it was up to the secretary, my colleague, who was the last one to leave around 7 p.m. to put them on charge and then close the shutters and doors and go home. One morning, I think it was the 8th day, I had been working for a month with the children. We all find ourselves summoned one by one to the office by our leaders, so I go there without really understanding what is going on. I pass in front of the secretary, who doesn't look serene at all, and that worries me a bit. My senior manager asked me if I returned my walkie the day before, or if I knew someone had taken one. I say that I did return mine by pointing it at the charging station, and I explain that I didn't hear anything else. I still ask why I'm being asked this question, and then my manager tells me. The night before at 7 p.m, as she was closing about to leave, my colleague was closing the shutters when one of the walkie-talkies lit up and a male voice came out saying, "Hey, Beauty of the Isles, you're beautiful when you close those shutters." I had a vile shiver go down my spine. My colleague, being the only foreigner on the team, the person who spoke to her had to be looking at her and really talking to her, and not a hoax. At that time, she had called her roommate who had come to pick her up and left the other day with someone. We never heard from that guy again. Nevertheless, we patrolled for several days to try to notice someone, for our safety, but also especially for the children's safety. The second story takes place in the third and thus the penultimate week of work. It is around 11 a.m. when I am called on the talkie by my manager. She tells me that something very strange has just happened. I ask her what it is, and again, I could feel this shiver of anguish. A man had come to the secretariat and asked to see me. To see me, using my first and last name. My manager had gone to see me because she thought it was strange, because nobody is supposed to show up at my workplace, and apart from my parents and friends, nobody knew I was there. This man had then introduced himself as my uncle, and he had come to pick me up for personal reasons. My manager said that I was not on the site, which was not true, and that she would come and let me know that he had come by. According to her, he looked very annoyed and left without giving his name. You could say it was a plausible story, but I only have one uncle, who is my godfather, who doesn't fit the description of the man who came, and to whom I don't talk to at all, Again, I have never heard from this man again, and have never seen him. But I still have this bad feeling that someone I don't know forged an identity to come and get me. Who knows what would have happened if I had gone? And I'm grateful to my manager who knew how to smell the trouble. That was a bit long, maybe not very interesting, but it makes me feel good to talk about it. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everybody.
To preface this, I'd like to say that my school is regularly featured on both national and local news and internet for the amount of ridiculous stuff that happens here. Riot, food fights, incidents where the girls' nude pictures get spread, Cypress Bay, anyone? And finally, a full-on bomb threat. My school has a fairly large campus, one large 2-story building comprising the entire arts, science and sports departments, the lunchroom and administration offices. Another 2 large-story buildings that house the media center and hundreds of classrooms, followed by a third 3-story building and 50 portables. This makes covering all school grounds time-consuming and very dangerous. So when there was a bomb threat in my freshman year, we were locked down for over 4 hours while the SWAT team scoured the building accompanied by police dogs and armed with M4s and 12-gauge shotguns. We were told to sit against the wall on which the door was because there was also a report of a possible gunman. I was honestly terrified. I saw the police and SWAT team run through the bathrooms in front of our class, and thoughts of running off campus into my house were inundating me. I lived in the neighborhood across the street, a 60-second dash that could get me to safety. In the end, they found out it was a fluke, and it was all staged by one kid that faked a bomb threat to avoid taking a test. Idiot didn't even get suspended. We went to a school located on a main street in Sydney. One day there was a bank robbery further down the street. Masked men, armed police, the whole 9 yards. During this time, a few students decided they were going to sneak off and have a quick ciggy down the back oval. This oval linked the main road to the back streets. Meanwhile, back in the main street, the police were chasing the robbers down it, who promptly ran through the school. By this time, we were already in lockdown. The smokers and robbers ran through the oval and into the back street. The police had lost them at the time and stood on the back oval trying to work out where they could have gone. One of the officers heard sounds coming from the bushes, and all 20 armed police officers raised their guns and called for them to come out. 2 terrified 15-year-olds came out of the bushes to see 20 armed police officers aiming their guns at them. The robbers were eventually caught, I believe, and the 2 kids never smoked again. In the summer of 2002, when I was 12, I went to the California School for the Blind for a tech training camp. There were 12 of us, 6 girls and 6 boys. The boys had started spreading scary ghost stories around school. What they didn't know was that some of the stories were actually true. On the first night, I was telling my roommate the story of the booms. Booms are toilet bowl-shaped bouncing creatures that bring knickknacks to children. The moment I described the sound they made, 3 loud booms came from the wall of the room beside ours, and I asked the girls in that room if they'd heard it, and they said no. The second night, I got up to go to the room attached to the shared bathroom. That's where I saw it. It was round like a ball, with a half horn on its head and glowing red eyes. I don't remember the next part, but I was filled in later. I apparently ran out the room screaming that there was something in our bathroom. Oddly, I remember leaving the room prior to seeing the thing to tell someone that there was peeling paint on a wall. My roommate told me she'd heard speaking in male voices, and also many rude words. She also said that she heard chains rattling outside and saw the glow of eyes. 4 years later, I started attending the school there. The staff members from that night still worked there, and her response when we met is that she remembered me that night. She then told me that she saw it, and she and other students and staff had heard similar stuff. Other friends told me that they had seen and heard things. Some of the events were freezing cups of water, glowing toys, drums, flutes, and orbs. I believe that in the children's dorm and health center are the two most haunted areas, and it's said that the school was built on an Indian burial ground.
This story happened around a year ago. I was a sophomore in high school. I joined study summer camp at university, along with around 40 kids aged 13 to 17. We sleep in a dormitory in the back of the gymnasium. The girls' dorm has 15 beds with barely a space between 2 rows of bed. The dorm's door has a clear glass on it, as seen in the picture. There's a door connected between the dorm and the restroom, and it was unused because we place our suitcases in front of that door. We usually go out the dorm and enter the restroom instead. The red space in the picture is an open area outside the gym. Everyone can walk in, but we always keep the dorm's door locked. We have 2 staffs in the dorm, and there's security guards patrolling around at night, so we didn't think anything. That night, we go to sleep around 1 a.m. Everyone was there except my friend Pearl, who left since the morning of that day to run her errands for a few days. I woke up to the sound of the door opening. It's still dark. I was still half asleep, so I assume it's my friend coming back from the restroom and to try to sleep again. But I fully wake up when I realize that he was a very large man, and he was standing at the end of my bed. From the view behind him, he turned to watch Pearl's empty bed, and then bent down at my other friend, Marie. One of the staff was awake too, and she screamed, waking everybody up. The man quickly ran away. I and everyone were shaking in fear for a while, and then I, a few friends and staff went out to explain the situation to the security guards. They check around, but he's not there anymore. Meanwhile, Marie recalled that she saw this man from the corridor, the yellow lines, when she was back from the restroom that night. She first assumed he was the security guard because she wasn't wearing her glasses. We told the professor in the morning, and later that morning, we found out something that makes this story worse. Pearl's mum called the professor to inform that day Pearl had left. She woke up early to shower, and then someone stuck a phone over the top of the shower door to film her. She saw it immediately and yelled, so she wasn't really filmed, but she did see it was a pink phone. The professor checked everyone's phone, but no one has a phone that fit the description, so we were sure it wasn't a student prank. They later catch a large man. He was a recently retired local police officer, and he had a pink phone. So yeah, let's not meet again. I don't know what was his intention. We assumed either he came back for Pearl from the restroom incident and thought that Marie was Pearl, or feared that Marie might have seen him. But either way, it's very scary to see a man stalking in a girl's dorm at night.
I am a teacher and have been teaching English in Texas since 2012. This is my 7th year in the classroom, and I've recently moved up to a new high school in our district. I was and am very excited to begin my new year here, after being in the trenches of middle school classrooms for 6 years. My 2nd year in my first school, I was asked to move classrooms to a room at the end of the hall upstairs, which wasn't a problem per se, as many people move due to attribution, and schools are always willing to help teachers move classrooms. The school at that time was roughly 20 years old. I took great pleasure in preparing a welcoming environment for students. The walls were covered, which I'm positive was a fire hazard, in amazing posters, engaging student art. I had several lamps as well as fluorescent lights. Every year for Halloween, we'd begin to read and analyze Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which was always a favorite. I took 2 days to read and analyze and read about the poems the students were really receptive to, and enjoyed the spooky atmosphere I created with decoration as we listened to Christopher Lee's and James Earl Jones' version on YouTube. It was a nice way to relax before the holiday. The first year in the new classroom right after Halloween and the Poe analysis, things began happening. The lamps would flicker. There wasn't any perceivable pattern, nothing flew around the room, exploded or fell over. The lamps would just flicker, whether I was in the room by myself or in a conference or anything. Once a week, the lights would flicker on and off. I attributed this to the old wiring, and honestly thought nothing of it, choosing to capitalize on the events and teach students about puns at the same time, commenting that we had a poltergeist among us who loved poetry and generally freaking us out. It wasn't disrespectful or ironic, it was more of a nod to whatever was happening and generally added to the climate of the room and the culture of the different classes. After winter break, something else happened. I was working with a small group in the back of the class during a test. I was playing music softly in the background. The music went all the way up, as in the volume was maxed, went back to medium level and then went back to max, then slowly went back down to the original volume. Again, I attributed this to our poltergeist. Students thought it was great, and logically, I thought this was due to some issue with a software bug, old wiring or something of that nature. Things like this, lights, volume modulating, happened once a week or so after the initial volume incident, and continued until my last year at the school, when I packed up my classroom and moved to a new school at the end of last year. I finally said goodbye to my little visitor part for nostalgia's sake, and nothing weird happened. I just took my last load of stuff down to my car, pretty anticlimactic. Nothing else happened until a few weeks ago at my new school. At this point it had been about 9 months since anything had happened, and one of my classes had earned a game for the day for an upcoming Friday. One of the students jokingly said that they were going to bring in a Ouija board, to which I said it was not a good idea, and I told him that I'm totally haunted. Of course they wanted to hear this story, and being that it was the end of the 6 weeks everyone was passing, and they liked stories, I told them the story and relayed the above. The only thing was this. I told them the story about the volume, and I was leaning over my chair, elbows to my knees, reminiscing as I mentioned the poltergeist. About 10 students were paying attention with eye contact at this point, and I was playing music on my computer when suddenly the volume spiked. It was completely maxed. It then moved to about medium level, maxed again, and went back to a quiet background ambience. And that's where the girls and a boy screamed. It freaked them out. They lost it. One Catholic student hung his crucifix on the volume knob and said he'd pray for me. One girl ran out the room and refused to come back inside for the rest of the class period. I was able to calm them down, and nothing else happened at school. I asked our tech guru on campus what might have caused the volume to modulate. Wires crossed, rats, hardware or software issues. I don't know this man well. We haven't had conversations, and he replies saying that it isn't possible. There's no logical reason, and then he said that you must be haunted. This was in front of a class where I have a few students from the original class that saw the volume thing happen earlier. It freaked them out, and I laughed it off, but it was the first time I really considered the words in relation to poltergeist. I looked around my classroom, and the one thing I bought decoration-wise from my middle school classroom was a painting/drawing of Edgar Allan Poe that I've hung on my bulletin board in the back. This last Monday was my first time when something happened at home. 2 things actually. I went to my younger son's room to wake him up, flipped on his desk lamp, and the bulb burnt out with a loud pop. I don't think much of it until I was drying my hair in the downstairs bathroom. My younger son was downstairs reading his book on the couch, way out of range from the bathroom. I had a hairdryer blasting near my head, so it was pretty loud, and my husband, dog, and older son were upstairs when I hear a loud scratching at head height on the bathroom door. It was seriously loud, as if my dog, a German Shepherd, was scratching up that high. So I immediately turned off the hairdryer, opened the door saying, "What is it?" And my youngest son ran around the corner saying, "What was that, Mum?" completely clueless. I didn't have the courage to tell my husband until after school break. He's quite logical generally, and honestly I was embarrassed he'd think I was crazy. He tried to explain that I must be tired and stressed. All logical, good-natured suggestions. He's telling me this as he was walking towards the bathroom to prove a point. That's when he found the scratches on the bathroom door around head height. Not gouged into the wood, but scratches in the varnish you can clearly see at an angle. I asked him what to do, and he said to share it with you. and get suggestions as to what you guys think. When I was in grade 9, it was just a normal boring day at Brooks High School. We were doing work when we got an announcement saying code black, which means lockdown. My teachers quickly locked the doors, shut the curtains on the windows, and I heard some of the other teachers rush out and lock the 2 doors in our foyer. And I said to myself, awesome, no work. I was always like that whenever the fire alarm went off, but I knew it could be serious, and I had to be sensible and listen to my teachers in case something bad happened. Everyone sat at their desks while I sat on a bench seat, which was close to the door, and even though the window on the classroom door was covered, I tried to look out the side to see if I could see anyone on the school grounds through the foyer window, but nothing. The whole school was that quiet. It was the quietest I've ever heard our grade block. It started to become scary and freaky. After a while, we finally got the all-clear announcement and went about our day. At lunch, rumors were going around saying that some idiot in our grade who I hated held the assistant principal up at knife point, and he had a list of people he wanted to kill, including one of my friends, and he was the one who told me the rumor. I think he was expelled, and ever since then, we never had another lockdown, not even after we graduated, and from this day I know my old high school is safe and secure for anyone to attend.
Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed my narration. I want to say thank you to Mortis Media for the opportunity to narrate these stories for this channel. If you enjoyed my narration, please follow the link in the video description to check out my channel, Mr. Sinister. I narrate some true horror stories such as these, and also lots of paranormal stories featuring ghosts, cryptids, wendigos, and skinwalkers. I hope to see you over there soon. Thanks again.